Elon Musk exposed something on live TV that no one saw coming. Millions in taxpayer money gone, and every trail led back to Letitia James. She thought no one would ask questions. But when Elon showed the truth, the entire room went silent. What happened next changed everything. Stick around because this is the moment they never wanted you to see. Nobody has told you this yet, but Elon Musk discovered something buried in New York spending files that could change the way America sees its tax system. It started quietly. No press, no cameras, just a stack of documents that ended up on Elon's desk through a friend of a friend inside the New York state government. At first, it looked like boring financial paperwork. Budgets, grant allocations, spreadsheets full of numbers. But Elon doesn't skim. He studies, and one small column caught his attention. It showed hundreds of millions of federal dollars. Money meant to support basic services being funneled into vague programs with titles like Equity Compliance, Task Force, and Restorative Outreach Units. No descriptions, no receipts, just cash flowing out with little to no explanation. He kept digging. The more he looked, the stranger it got. The same addresses kept popping up. Some programs listed 0 staff. Others had no contact info at all. One organization had received over $20 million in a single year and didn't even have a working website. That's when the questions started forming in his head. Where was the money actually going? And who had signed off on it? Elon didn't go public right away. Instead, he reached out to someone who had the experience and grit to take this further. Pam Bondi. She wasn't new to political fights, and she didn't hesitate. Within a day, she confirmed what Elon suspected. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were patterns. And those patterns pointed to New York Attorney General Letitia James. Pam asked a simple question. Is federal money being used to push political agendas under the cover of justice and equity? She took that question straight to Congress. And to everyone's surprise, Congress listened. A public hearing was scheduled. Witnesses were called. And yes, Elon Musk agreed to testify. That's when the media woke up. Headlines lit up with his name. Some praised him, some mocked him, but no one ignored him. The richest man in the world was about to expose what he believed to be the misuse of federal funds by one of the most powerful state officials in the country. And Letitia James, she said nothing. Not a word to the press. No statements, no defense, just silence. Now, here's the part that matters. What Elon found goes far beyond New York. It affects every state that receives federal funding. It affects how your tax dollars are spent. But the full story, the part that makes people uncomfortable, isn't public yet. That's what this hearing was for. And what Elon revealed inside that room, well, it left even seasoned politicians in shock. But if you think you know where this is headed, think again. The truth behind those files and what Letitia James tried to keep hidden is something you'll want to hear for yourself. Stay with us because by the end of this story, you'll understand why the room went silent. The hearing wasn't supposed to be explosive. It was scheduled like any other oversight session. Routine, procedural, probably forgotten within a week. But Pam Bondi had other plans. She walked in with a calm expression, holding a thick folder in one hand and a flash drive in the other. Her tone was measured. Her posture was steady, but behind the scenes she was fully loaded. Every document had been verified, every slide crossed. She wasn't there to make noise, she was there to make a point. The first few minutes were quiet. Standard opening statements, polite greetings, a few nervous jokes from members of the committee. Cameras were rolling, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary until Pam took the mic. She started with one sentence. This isn't about politics. This is about money, your money, and what's been done with it. The room stiffened. She clicked a remote and the first slide appeared. A screenshot of a wire transfer from a federal education grant, redirected to a consulting group that listed its address as a UPS mailbox in Brooklyn. No contact phone number, no financial disclosures. Just a $3.20, $2 million payment with a description equity curriculum review. Pam looked around the room. She didn't speak loudly, but every word landed hard. That money was meant for classrooms. It went to a company with no staff and no students. Another click, another slide. A mental health outreach grant redirected to an organization that hosted workshops on colonial healing through sound baths. The cost $870,000. The reach 74 participants. More slides followed. A housing assistance program that awarded nearly $9 million to a nonprofit founded just 2 months prior with no previous record of operations. And then the name appeared on screen. Letitia James. Every document Pam showed had been authorized under James's office, signed, approved, and in some cases fast. The room grew colder with every slide. Some tried to interrupt. A few representatives raised objections about the relevance. But Pam wasn't budging. She made it clear. This wasn't about ideology. It was about oversight. It was about whether one person, backed by political buzzwords, had turned federal funds into a personal agenda. Then she paused. For months, New York taxpayers had no idea where their money was going. Now, we're finding out, and we're just getting started. Still, something was missing. The link, the proof that these programs weren't just inefficient or bloated, but intentionally misleading. And that's when she revealed the twist. Elon Musk will be here in 1 hour, and he's bringing data that none of us have seen. Now the room changed. This wasn't just a policy dispute anymore. It was a warning shot. Pam had laid the groundwork. Elon was about to bring the receipts. The countdown had begun. When Elon Musk walked into the chamber, the room changed instantly. Reporters leaned forward. Phones came out. Some members of Congress whispered to each other, already speculating what he might say. He didn't bring a team of lawyers, no handlers, no aides, just himself. A laptop and a calm, focused look. He sat down, adjusted the mic, and nodded once. Then he spoke. "I'm not here to give opinions. I'm here to show numbers." That's when he opened his laptop and connected it to the screen behind him. The first graph appeared, color-coded, simple, and impossible to ignore. It showed a sharp spike in federal funds sent to New York over the past 3 years. Nothing unusual there. But then the second graph appeared, showing how that money was distributed. Instead of public services or infrastructure, the largest portion, over 31%, was redirected to something labeled social equity reform. Elon paused. No federal agency defines what that means. There's no oversight, no clear metrics, but it's where the money is going. He clicked again. This time, the map of New York, lit up with data points. Each one represented a program or nonprofit that had received at least $1 million in funding. Dozens of them had the same mailing address. Others shared phone numbers or board members. It looked less like a public investment network and more like a shell game. One point in particular stood out. A group labeled Access for All had received $12.4 million. But when Elon's team checked their physical location, they found nothing but an empty office suite and a locked door. The questions came fast. Was this fraud? Was someone personally benefiting? Elon didn't accuse anyone directly, but he raised one eyebrow and said, when multiple programs receiving millions share the same P.O. box, something's wrong. He continued, showing IRS reports, real estate filings, and contract duplicates. All public records, nothing classified, nothing secret, just data that no one had bothered to connect before. And then he dropped a number that shook the room. Over $26 million in taxpayer funds redirected to entities that either no longer exist or never fully operated. He let the silence do the work. A few members tried to push back, asking if this wasn't just a matter of sloppy paperwork or overcomplicated bureaucracy. Elon smiled slightly. Maybe, but what's more likely? That dozens of different groups all made the same mistake, or that someone wanted it to look like a mistake. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't emotional, but every word carried weight. And then he closed his laptop and leaned back. I'm not here to say who's guilty. I'm here to say the data doesn't lie. The hearing took a break after that. People rushed out to file headlines. Pam Bondi stayed seated, calm, and silent. Letitia James still hadn't shown up, not even a spokesperson. But everyone knew when the hearing resumed, things were going to get personal because Elon had just raised the stakes. When the hearing resumed, the first thing everyone noticed was the empty seat. Letitia James had been invited. Her nameplate was there, but her chair stayed vacant. The committee chair made a brief statement. Her office had declined to send a representative. No comment, no excuse, just a formal notice that she would not be participating. That silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Pam Bondi didn't react. She simply looked at the chair, then turned back to the microphone. The room was quieter now. The tension had shifted. It was no longer about theories or suspicions. It was about accountability. And one of the most powerful figures in state government had chosen not to show up. That's when Pam changed gears. She turned to a different set of documents, ones that hadn't been part of Elon's testimony. Let's talk about outcomes, she said. Let's look at what these programs actually did. She clicked her remote again, and the screen showed an education program in upstate New York. It had received nearly $8 million over 2 years to improve minority graduation rates. But the numbers showed that those rates hadn't improved at all. In fact, they had dropped. Another example, a public health initiative designed to serve underserved communities. Over $5 million in funding, and yet they only held 3 events. 3. No permanent staff, no medical professionals on payroll, just volunteers, social media flyers, and vague community healing circles. Pam didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She just read the numbers slowly, clearly. This isn't about whether equity matters, she said. It's about whether the people in charge are doing what they promised. And the answer is, they're not. By now, even the committee members who had been skeptical were leaning forward. One congressman asked if the failure of these programs was due to poor management or something more intentional. Pam answered carefully. If it's poor management, we need to know who's responsible. And if it's intentional, we have a bigger problem than anyone expected. Then she paused and let the moment breathe. It's not enough to say you care about justice, you have to prove it. and wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on broken programs while children go without proper schools and families live in shelters. That's not justice. The room went still, and that's when one of the committee members said what everyone else was thinking. If Letitia James had nothing to hide, why isn't she sitting here right now? No one answered. Because by that point, everyone knew the question didn't need a response. It needed a reckoning. The committee had heard enough about broken programs and ghost nonprofits, but Elon Musk had one more piece to share. And this time it wasn't just about money. It was about people. He stood again, calm as ever, and opened a new file. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a chart this time. It was a map of New York City. Dozens of red markers lit up across the boroughs. Then, with a click, he zoomed in on one. This address received $2.4 million under an inclusive housing initiative, Elon said. But it's not a housing facility, it's a hotel, and the entire building was leased out, not to families, not to citizens, but to undocumented residents. The room shifted. He showed another address, same thing. Millions in federal housing grants redirected to temporary lodging centers that provided no public accountability, no entry logs, no oversight, and no transparency on who was staying there. Then he showed a timeline. Over the past 18 months, New York had quietly increased spending on temporary housing by over 340%, not through public announcements, not through council votes, but through backdoor contracts signed by state offices, including, once again, Letitia James' department. Pam Bondi leaned forward, asking what that meant for the average taxpayer. Elon didn't flinch. It means you're paying for services that were never approved by your representatives, and in many cases, you're paying for people who aren't even legally counted in the system. He pulled up one final slide. It was a list of tax-funded programs labeled as community enrichment that had quietly adjusted their eligibility requirements. They no longer required proof of residency, no ID, no legal status, just a name and a form. And yet, the funds kept flowing. Pam stepped in. Are you saying these programs were intentionally designed to bypass federal regulations? Elon paused. I'm saying they were structured in a way that makes it impossible to know who's benefiting and nearly impossible to track where the money ends up. By now, even the networks that had downplayed the hearing were broadcasting the feed live. The numbers were too large, the evidence too clear. Pam closed her folder. If this is happening in New York, what makes us think it's not happening in other states, too? No one had an answer, but the question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. And outside that room, governors and lawmakers around the country were already making phone calls because Elon hadn't just exposed New York, he had opened a door, and now the rest of the country was about to look inside. By the next morning, the hearing had made headlines across every major network. Clips of Elon's testimony were everywhere. News segments, social media, even late-night shows, trying to spin it with humor. But the facts weren't funny, and not everyone was happy. Letitia James still hadn't spoken publicly, but her office finally released a short statement. It called the hearing a political stunt designed to distract from the real issues facing Americans. It didn't address the missing funds. It didn't answer for the programs. It didn't deny the data. Just a vague dismissal paired with a warning. Our work continues. But behind the scenes, the pushback was growing louder. Several political figures began circling the wagons, defending James and accusing Bondi and Musk of targeting minority communities. They called it an attack on progress, an assault on social justice. A few media outlets even claimed the numbers Elon used were misleading, though none offered alternative data. Pam Bondi wasn't rattled. She went on national television that night and kept it simple. This isn't about race. It's not about politics. It's about the fact that billions in federal funds are going somewhere and we don't know where. She held up one of the documents Elon had shown. Clear, unedited, signed. If this same spending pattern were found in a red state, the outrage would be immediate. So why is no one asking questions when it happens in blue ones? That hit a nerve. The next morning, a well-known political commentator accused her of undermining trust in public institutions. But Pam didn't back down. She asked a new question. If we can't question where our tax dollars are going, what kind of democracy do we actually have? Meanwhile, Elon returned to work, as usual. He didn't post much, just one short message. The data is public. I just connected the dots. But the noise didn't stop. Editorials, op-eds, heated rounds. Some demanded further investigation, others tried to shift the topic entirely. One major outlet published an article claiming that Elon's involvement was inappropriate for a tech CEO. Still, no one could point to a single factual error in his testimony, and that's what made it all so uncomfortable. Because the evidence was real. The money had moved. The silence from Letitia James wasn't helping. And now, governors in several other states had quietly begun their own reviews of how federal grants were being distributed within their borders. Pam Bondi had started a conversation that couldn't be shut down, and Elon Musk had made sure the world was listening. It didn't happen overnight, but within a few days of the hearing, the tone in the media started to shift. At first, most outlets had treated the story like a political drama, Elon Musk stirring the pot, Pam Bondi playing to the base. But now, something had changed. Too many people were asking questions. Too many documents had surfaced. The usual dismissals weren't sticking. One morning, a major outlet released a quiet correction in the corner of its homepage. It admitted that one of the nonprofits, Bondi, mentioned in the hearing, had in fact dissolved months earlier, despite still receiving over $1 million in funds. Just last quarter, that same day, a local New York journalist published a bombshell report. They had visited 3 of the addresses listed in the day grant filings. 2 were shuttered. 1 didn't exist. Suddenly, it wasn't just a Bondi and Musk story anymore. It was a funding scandal. The headlines changed. Where did the money go? New questions surround Letitia James' office. Elon Musk may have a point after all reporters began pressing state officials for answers. Most received vague statements about audits and review processes, but none were willing to say on the record that the money had been spent correctly. Still, Letitia James remained quiet. No press conference, no interviews, just silence. Pam Bondi noticed, in one interview, she said plainly, if the Attorney General of a state can't come forward and explain her office's actions, she shouldn't be in that office. It landed hard. Even lawmakers who had dismissed the hearing began to waver. A few suggested follow-up hearings. Others called for independent investigations. And some stayed completely silent, hoping the news cycle would move on. But it didn't because Elon wasn't done. That week, he posted a new thread, this time with side-by-side comparisons of funding data from New York and Florida. Florida's allocations were clear, tracked, and reviewed every quarter. New York's were scattered. He captioned it with one line. This isn't about states, it's about systems. It went viral. People began tagging their own governors, asking for transparency. State treasurers across the country started fielding questions they weren't used to answering. Taxpayers were waking up, and the press, they had no choice but to follow the story where it was going. Straight to the offices that had been hiding the truth. A week after the hearing, the pressure reached a boiling point. Congress had stayed mostly silent, but the public hadn't. Town halls were packed. Local radio stations were buzzing. Governors in 5 different states were now calling for independent audits of their federal spending programs. Then, without warning, Letitia James broke her silence. She walked into a press conference, flanked by 2 advisors. No smiles, no jokes, no distractions, just a stack of papers in her hand and a tight expression on her face. The room went quiet. I've done my job to the best of my ability, she began, and I will not be intimidated by billionaires or political attacks. But what followed wasn't a defense, it was a deflection. She didn't address the empty buildings. She didn't explain the ghost nonprofits. She didn't even mention the wire transfers or the missing documentation. Instead, she called the hearing a dangerous precedent and claimed it was designed to discourage equity-focused initiatives across the country. When a reporter asked her directly if she could account for the $26 million Elon had flagged, she paused. Then she said, "We are reviewing all claims internally." That was it. Pam Bondi responded within hours. "This isn't about discouraging equity," she said on national television. "It's about discouraging corruption. If Miss James wants to defend her record, she's welcome to appear before Congress under oath." That clip went viral. By now, public opinion had shifted sharply. Polls showed that even among moderate voters, trust in how federal funds were being used had dropped by double digits in just 1 week. Social media feeds were filled with clips from the hearing, side by side, with photos of the abandoned offices Musk had shown. Then something unexpected happened. A group of bipartisan lawmakers introduced a new proposal, the Federal Funds Transparency Act. It would require states to publicly disclose all recipients of federal grants and provide quarterly reports for every program funded with taxpayer money. The timing was no coincidence. Elon Musk didn't comment on the bill, but he posted a single emoji, a flashlight. The message was clear. Letitia James had tried to weather the storm, but the tide had turned. It was no longer about her. It was about every official who thought no one was paying attention, because now the whole country was watching. What happened next didn't make as many headlines, but it mattered more. Inside state capitals across the country, quiet meetings started happening behind closed doors. Budget directors were called in. Agency heads were questioned. Suddenly, the usual rubber stamp approach to federal grants was no longer safe. In New York, several mid-level staffers from Letitia James's office were quietly reassigned. One stepped down entirely. No reason given, no farewell memo, just gone. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi returned to Florida, but the calls didn't stop. Lawmakers wanted her input. Governors asked for her review. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She had become a watchdog, and she leaned into the role. "We can't change the past," she said in one interview, "but we can make sure every dollar moving forward goes where it's supposed to." Her message resonated. The Federal Funds Transparency Act picked up momentum. By the end of the month, over 60 House members had signed on. Republicans and Democrats, no one wanted to be seen as standing in the way of oversight. And as for Elon Musk, he never sat for another hearing. He didn't need to. His role was never to stay in the spotlight. It was to shine a light where others wouldn't. And now that the light was on, it wasn't going away. In fact, several investigative reporters followed up on the original documents Elon had shown. They traced funds from New York to two estate accounts. Some ended up tied to political action committees. Others vanished completely. The findings were published, piece by piece, creating wave after wave of public pressure. Letitia James still hadn't returned to Congress. She didn't answer questions. Her office insisted they were committed to equity and accountability, but the numbers didn't back it up, and the public knew it. Voters were now demanding itemized spending reports. News anchors were asking sharper questions. Even federal agencies started reviewing their own grant guidelines. This wasn't just a moment anymore, it was a movement. What began with one whistleblower, one billionaire, and one determined attorney had shaken the system, not through outrage, not through scandal, but through proof, hard numbers, real evidence. And it left the political world with a question it wasn't used to answering. What happens when someone finally connects the dots on live TV? The question hung in the air from the very start. What exactly had Letitia James tried to hide? It wasn't just one payment. It wasn't just one nonprofit. It was the entire structure built around good intentions and no accountability. When Elon Musk testified, he didn't accuse her directly. But the data told a different story. And by the end of the hearing, the full picture had become impossible to ignore. Letitia's office had quietly redefined how federal money could be used. Programs meant for housing were rerouted to hotels with no oversight. Educational grants were sent to consulting groups with no teachers. Public safety funds were used for messaging campaigns, some of them political in nature, and all of it was buried under titles like equity, restorative initiatives, and justice-centered investments. They sounded noble, but there was no proof they worked. What Letitia James had tried to hide was simple: failure wrapped in the language of progress. It wasn't that the money was stolen, it was worse. It was spent completely on things that couldn't be tracked, couldn't be measured, and couldn't be defended when someone finally asked where the results were. Pam Bondi had pulled the curtain back. Elon Musk had turned on the light, and the American people saw what had been hidden behind the noise. By the end of that month, 10 states announced reviews of their own day spending. 3 governors ordered independent audits, and Congress passed the initial version of the transparency bill by a wide margin. Letitia James kept her job for now, but her political future, that was unclear. One thing was certain: the days of quiet mismanagement were over, because now when someone says trust the system, people ask for proof. What started as one hearing, it became a wake-up call, and all it took was someone finally asking the right question: where did the money really